So what makes great D&D, especially 5e D&D, because we can go into what makes great first edition D&D and what made first edition AD&D and what made great 3.5 or 3.0 and what made great 4e. But what makes great 5e? That's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Hello, Chris. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right, Paco. How are you?
Well, you know how I'm doing. I have this wisdom tooth infected at the moment, and pretty huge doses of paracetamol and other drugs to keep the pain at bay. And I am having antibiotics, which I need to take as soon as we finish this episode. And then tomorrow I'm going to have them extracted. So tomorrow...
I had all that done like years ago.
Oh, yes. You're telling me that... you're so retro. Come on. I'm late. But, you know, I feel like I'm
What are
late.
you, 30?
Well, exactly. I feel like I'm late to the party because whenever I've told everybody at work, you know, what was going on, I've had people, oh, I've had that. Oh, I've had that. Oh, I've done that. Oh, yeah, when I have that, I was like, wait a second. I am by far, I mean, bar one person, I could be the father of pretty much anybody else in my team. And I think I'm the only one who's not had their bottom teeth done. It's a bit like, why am I so late to the party? I mean, I'm glad I've been 50 years without, you know, suffering, but I'm missing out something. I mean, what's so cool about having your wisdom teeth extracted that everybody's already done it?
I don't think it's very cool. I don't think it's cool.
Oh.
I think it's an unfortunate side effect of good dental hygiene, though.
So you mean I'm not going to be cool tomorrow?
No, not really. You're already cool enough. I mean, well, look at your fabulous facial hair.
That's true. That's very true. That's very true. I am living. Somebody asked me the other day, a friend I haven't seen in a month and a half or nearly 2 months, because they've been on holiday and you know it's been kind of very, very busy, and they haven't seen me without my mustache. And he said, "Oh, I've got a mustache. What are you doing with that?" I said, "Look, I'm living all my hair fantasies I cannot have on my head, in my face. You know,
you're like a D&D dwarf. A D&D dwarf.
Absolutely.
You need little jewels and stuff to put in it now.
Yeah, I think that would cost me a divorce, though. I'll have to be careful with that. You know, too early, my mustache, that's absolutely fine with my husband. But if I started to do beads and that sort of thing, I even joked with Marty about having it dyed completely white. Because, I mean, what's the point? Yeah, I have patches of gray and white. So just the whole white and go the full, you know, cool daddy looks. And he just looked at me and like, you really want to be in my testament? I mean, do you really still want to be in my will, or are you testing the waters here too much? Okay, fine. Let's leave it to grace naturally. That'll do.
My kids are always bugging me to grow my hair long and grow my beard longer because they want to braid it. But
okay, grow your beard, fine. Grow your hair, please don't.
The only way that might happen is if I decide that I'm going to like play Santa Claus at some point, you know. Like,
and even so, I'm sorry, but I don't think you have enough density to look like anything else than a very, very old biker who's just cannot let go of the glory days on that Harley Davidson with a ponytail. So please don't.
Okay.
I mean, I'm going to love you regardless, but please.
But you'll tell me I have bad hair.
Yeah. Sorry. Sorry, it's my full transparency policy. Yeah.
I'll go to Spain and you'll say we're going to the barber now.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I thought I would love to introduce you to my barber. He's brilliant. He's great. He's done this. So okay, let's delve into this because I'm sure that people. I mean, don't get me wrong. I bet they are really enthralled with this topic of conversation and really. Laughing over with our jokes and our incredible wits and grits. But that's not what they're here for. They're here to hear about how to make great D&D. So I'll tell you what, why don't we go back a little bit in retrospect? And for just a few minutes, we talk about actually what made D&D great through the history of D&D, because
Okay.
it can be said an awful lot of bad things about D&D, but it cannot be denied that it has some really great things, and it's always been a great game, even when it was a shitty first edition, kind of rubbish game, which it was, but it was still
Uh,
great.
yeah, I mean, I started with basic D&D, so I've loved D&D forever.
So what made it great for you at the time? Because let's face it, I mean, if we look at it, and if you look at it from the designer objective point of view, or as objective as possible, it wasn't really that great of a game.
No, I would say though that like the basic set, like the Moldvay red box basic set back in 1981 ish, was a decent game.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in many ways it was more playable than AD&D was if you were going to follow all of AD&D's rules. But um, yeah, and what I loved about it then and what I still love about D&D now is that there's so much space for you to create something that emerges spontaneously from the parts and is greater than the sum of them.
That is a very interesting point and a very, very good way to put it. I have to say, I've been thinking about this for a while since we drew the list of what we're going to do, and I've been thinking about this for a while. And I think you just hit the nail in the head with doing or creating something that bigger than the sum of its parts when it all comes together. I haven't been able to articulate it that way before, but that really fits the bill quite
I mean,
a
for
lot.
a lot of us, these types of games, including Dungeons and Dragons, was our first experience with emergent storytelling. So the story doesn't exist in some of those early modules, for example, some of the early adventures. The story doesn't, I mean, seeds of stories exist, and you got to plant those seeds and water them by interacting with them and interacting with the players with them.
Mm-hmm.
And then a story emerges from that. And there are other media where that happens today, but I think for a lot of us back in the day, that was our first experience with that sort of spontaneous. The story occurs in the interaction of the parts.
Which is interesting because, I mean, I reckon that one of the things that made D&D great at the time, and perhaps this is because there wasn't anything like it done before, but one of the things that made D&D great at the time were actually the adventures, in the sense of the opportunity to develop them outside of the given scenario as you wanted. And I'll explain that in a bit. I mean, adventures in the past used to be more like scenarios. You get your scenario of this is what's happening, and just drop the players, and you know what's meant to happen. You know that you're meant to go to the cave. You know that you're meant to go to the wizard's tower. You know that you're meant to go to the village of Homlet. You know all these things.
Mm-hmm.
But somehow, and again, perhaps it is because there was nothing like it before, or because it didn't really have that many guidelines about it, the story appeared very spontaneously around that scenario. The scenario was the platform.
Right.
But the true story, I don't think that people remember the adventures of yesteryear because of, wow, they were great adventures, but because of, wow, we had such great adventures.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if there's something like that. And that I wonder how much that, made the game great at the time.
I think that did make the game great at the time, and I think it has the potential to make the game great in modern times too. So one of the things that these old adventures, they gave you a scenario, they gave you a setting, they gave you characters that exist in that setting. They might give you some events that happen in that setting, but all of these things are independent of their interaction with the player characters. So these things occur, or these things are there, or these things proceed in a certain direction until the players and their characters interfere with it, and then that's where the story occurs, right? So, you have this evil priest who's a spy. Spoiler in B1, the Caves of Chaos. The that wasn't B1, that was B2. Never mind. I just lost some cred. It's B2. It's Caves of Chaos. Keep on the Borderlands. There's an evil priest. I mean, there's a spy for the cult that exists in the Caves of Chaos that's in the keep. But he kind of is, the way he's described in the adventure, which is very thin, by the way, is that is just who he is. But he's a spy. He's evil, but he is in this position in the keep. How are you going to use him as a dungeon master? You're going to make him send the characters to do certain things, or is he going to try to thwart them or do something to them while they're in the keep? There are all of these possibilities that you could use that character for. None of them are in the adventure. None of them. It's just, this guy is in the keep. Let hijinks ensue is the implication, right? So, and I think that you can do that in modern times. You can write an adventure that says, that just gives these pieces that you could put together. But another part of the magic exists in the gaps that those adventures left. So there are places that you, as the DM, you have to fill them in, right?
And you know, I think that is one of the, probably for me, one of the biggest influences that D&D's had in by way of writing, because I love those gaps. If I am given story or adventure that has absolutely everything done for me,
right,
I'm a bit, you're not really asking me to play an adventure, you're asking me to follow a script.
Right. I think a lot of modern adventures do that type of script thing. I think that some of them have gotten away from it, but especially during the 3.0, transitioning into second edition and then the third edition through fourth edition, and even into fifth edition, it's more structured and a lot less just pieces that you can play with, just toys that you can play with, and gaps that you can fill. Now, one of the things about good design, though, and this is how you would do it this is about making Great 5e, right? If you were going to do such a thing in Great 5e, all of those gaps should be something that you know are there, because you're the designer and you've left them intentionally, right? Well, maybe not all of them, but a plurality of them should be intentional to leave space. And you might even have information in the adventure about how to use those gaps. Like, this is what you could do, which would be great for a new DM. But
yeah, I absolutely think so. I don't know. I just find them necessary for me for various reasons. Firstly, because I like to feel some freedom, which for me is one of the things that, as you were mentioning, it's always made D&D great. You have the freedom of taking an adventure and link it with each other, or split.
And another thing, though, is flexibility.
Yes,
you're not just free; you're flexible to change something like that if you need to.
Exactly, exactly. Which again is something that not many games can do. You know, an awful lot of people talk a lot about balance in D&D, which, let's not talk about that, because I laugh at the concept of balance. It's just nothing.
And maybe I'll leave something dangling for controversy in this video, but balance is not the key to Great D&D.
No, absolutely. In fact, lack of balance sometimes can be the key to great, absolutely brilliant D&D. So, but there are other games where, for instance, in a D&D game, you can change the number of monsters, the amount of spells, how quickly they move, how tough they can be, how they can be reasoned with. All of those variables are there with pretty much any half-decent monster out there, especially the higher level ones, because they tend to be very clever. You know, unless they're an animal, they tend to be very, very clever. But there are always many ways to go around it if you're crafty and clever enough. Whereas if you go to other games, there's no way to reason with a Shoggoth. You know,
well, I mean, if you had a Shoggoth in D&D, there might not be any way to reason with the Shoggoth in D&D, but
no, probably not. But you know what I mean. You know, there's a way of reasoning with a troll. There might be a way to actually enchant a bullet and suddenly you have a bullet friend, for instance, just out of the top of my head, or to trick a netting instead of being crushed by it.
Yeah, make his heads argue.
Exactly, something like that.
Yeah.
There's an awful lot of flexibility, and the thing is that there is a flexibility if the GM wants there to be that flexibility. If they see that, which is something I spoke in one of my TikTok videos recently. If the players, especially low-level characters, they run into this impossible to beat monster, you just, as I said, stop. Don't TPK them. Don't kill them. Use them. Why wouldn't the troll save their life and ask them to do some task, otherwise they will be killed? Or why isn't actually escaping from the lair of the monster become a side adventure that they have to go through at the same time as they recover their possessions? It is very easy to walk around that, even in an adventure that has already been written, because everything can be put to a stop, to a pause. Whereas in other games, it is hard to do that.
And it's hard to do it when everything is defined. Like, really, there's nothing that takes the magic out of an encounter like the monsters attack immediately. Some adventures say that, right? I mean, and that's okay. That gives a DM, you definitely know what's going to happen, but it's not necessarily the most interesting thing that could happen. And what if one of the players tries something that's just off the wall that you think should work? An experienced DM is going to be like, okay, well, we can play with that. But, and if something says, for newer people, it's like, it reads like the rules. Oh, these guys are going to fight you. They're not. So the magic of the old versions was that just said this room has an ogre in it. The ogre is asleep, period. End of discussion for what was published. Okay.
And now what?
Now what? Right? So, I tell a story all the time. One of the first times I knew that this was the greatest thing ever was I was playing with a friend, and we were playing that module, B2, Keep on the Borderlands. It was just me and him because we were the only ones who were playing D&D in our neighborhood at the time. That changed, but he played a thief. So he snuck into the Caves of Chaos. He snuck in. He went around and he was just sneaking around looking, and he saw the ogre cave. He peeks into the ogre cave. He sees the ogres asleep. He said, ogres probably have a lot of treasure, so I'm going to sneak into the ogre cave. And so back then, some of the treasure was neat too. Like, it very specifically pointed out that the ogre had a wheel of cheese, something like that. If I remember correctly, I might not be remembering correctly. You might have gotten the wheel of cheese from somewhere else. But if I remember correctly, the ogre has a wheel of cheese. He sneaks into the ogre lair. We dice like we're supposed to, and he doesn't wake the ogre up. He gets some of the treasure out from where the ogre has hidden it. He finds this wheel of cheese. And it was my understanding as a 10-year-old boy that the wheels of cheese are like, huge. And it said that it gave some absurd amount of weight too, if I recall correctly. So I said, okay, well, you can. He says, I want to take this wheel of cheese. Okay, well, you can take it, but you're carrying it, So he sneaks out of the ogre. He's carrying it home, and and I decided that we needed some more excitement, so I roll a random encounter, which I know isn't very popular today, but I rolled a random encounter. Roll one bandit. Okay, a bandit jumps out of the bushes. He sticks a knife in your face and is like, give me everything you're carrying. And he goes, my friend goes, I pull out my sword and attack. I said, well, you're carrying this gigantic wheel of cheese. And he says, oh, yeah. I just throw the wheel of cheese at him.
Okay.
And I had rolled that the bandit had 1 hit point. So I decided that
it was going to be crushed by the wheel of cheese.
So he threw the wheel of cheese at the guy. He hits. I say, okay, roll damage like it's a club. So he rolls the damage, and he smashes the bandit with the wheel of cheese. And that's the end of that story. He makes it back home because he smashed a bandit with a wheel of cheese.
That is amazing.
And all of this is created because of just these little tiny elements that are not explained any further, right?
And I think that is, to be honest, I think that is as it should be. I know that is not everybody's cup of tea, but I absolutely love that is how it should be, because I don't know, for me it makes everything a lot better. So for you, like going forward a little bit forward in time, what made Great 3.0 and 3.5 D&D?
Well, I mean, that's pro-
Apart from the fact that you designed it.
well, I came in at the tail end of the tail end of third edition, but
Even so, you had a pivotal role, I'm sure.
I think that one of the things that was strong about third edition was that it had some precision, and some of that was strong.
When you say precision, how you mean?
There was basically a rule for everything, and I don't think that was necessarily bad. One of the things that was weaker about older versions of D&D is that a different adventure might have different rules for how you swim and drown. I mean, but third edition D&D didn't have that problem.
Okay, so this is a controversial thing to say, though, because a lot of people complain that 3.0 and 3.5 had way too many rules.
I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that statement.
But you think that's what made it great, that it had a rule for everything?
I don't think that what made it great was it had a rule for everything. I think what made it great is that it had more precision.
Okay.
So you didn't have to rely on the adventure writer to help you make up the rule on the spot. So one of the things for the old school version of D&D and the old school versions of games out now is that it's rulings, not rules, and that's supposedly a virtue. And it is a virtue as long as it's consistent, but it can only be consistent at one table, right?
Okay.
And what I mean by one table is that another DM is going to rule differently because there is no rule. So if you go to play at a different table, you're going to have a different experience. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that it lacked a codified and unified understanding of what the game should be doing, if you understand what I mean. And like I said, I'm not saying that it's a virtue that there are so many rules in D&D and they were so specific at sometimes, but that at least there were universally understood rules.
Okay, no, that's fair enough. That's definitely fair enough, because as you know, I am very much a friend of rules. Yeah. What do you mean rules? 3, that's plenty. Thank you. Kind of GM and player. So I can see that. Don't know how many people will agree that amount of precision, because that kind of goes against what you were mentioning earlier. I mean, we were talking about how we liked the gaps and the imprecise nature of the presentation of the scenario in itself. There is an ogre sleeping. Doesn't tell you the ogre is friendly or unfriendly, if it's got a toothache, or if it's it's just on holiday and doesn't want to fight anything. It doesn't mention. So how do you mix that imprecision in the one part, but then the rules precision on the other?
Well, to me, they're two different things. So the imprecision existed in the rules and I would say, lack of prescribed story in the adventures. Now that changed over time, where stories were injected into the adventure and they became more like scripts, as you put it. But more precision in the rules themselves. So you have the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Player's Handbook. You know how the game is played. You don't have to rely on any interpretation from the adventure, for example. The adventure just gives you things that you need to run the adventure, and that's that. And that's I think that 3E could have very easily gone back to less precise adventures, because there were more precise rules.
Mhm.
It didn't because the tradition had been established that adventures have plots, right? They have specific plots. Um, and I'm not necessarily decrying plots. I'm just saying that if there are prescribed outcomes in an adventure, it is a little less. Um, it allows for a little less of the magic that role playing games can provide, which is this anything could happen type situation. So,
Okay. So let's move to 4E. Let's upset people. What made 4E great?
I think some of the moving parts have made 4E great. Some of the parts that probably shouldn't have been left behind in 5E. I was actually thinking about this the other day when I was thinking about talking to you about this. I didn't know we were going to talk about 4E, but I was thinking, like there are really cool design bits that things trigger off of and work with in 4E that would have been great in 5E,
Hmm.
and in fact could be ported into 5E, like the bloodied condition, for example. So in 5E, you have Sahuagin. They
Mhm.
have the blood frenzy. Sorry, I wanted to exaggerate that, but they have the blood frenzy ability, the blood frenzy trait, which means they have advantage on their attack rolls when they're attacking somebody who has fewer hit points than their maximum.
Yeah.
The thing is, that's everybody in the combat after
Mhm.
round 2, right?
Exactly.
So that means that this guy has advantage for the rest of the combat against everybody. That's not interesting. In 4E, that ability triggered off the fact that you were bloodied, which means you had half or fewer of your hit points. And that's not everybody on the battlefield. And not only that, if you as a player or if your character understands that Sohwagan have this ability, you might, as a strategy, keep everybody above half hit points.
Mhm.
Just, okay, she's wounded. She needs to be brought back up bloody before this Baron can attack her, because then he'll get the bonus from his blood frenzy. We don't want that because that's a big bonus, right? And there are player side things in 5e that could benefit from that too. So there's a cantrip called what's it called? Toll the Dead.
Mhm.
Toll the Dead deals 2d8 if your target is at full hit points. It deals deals d8s, I should say. It deals d8s based on your cantrip progression. If your target is uninjured, it deals d12s if your target is injured. But after the first, just in the same way, after the first couple rounds of combat, that's everybody on the battlefield. It doesn't provide the same interesting tactical choice. Like after round 2, I told the dead anybody, I get my d12s. But if you were in 4E, it would be, which one of these monsters is bloodied? That's who I'm going to toll, right? And it might actually make you change your mind, right? So, well, that's actually not the best strategic choice. I really should attack this guy for some other reason. So I'm not going to cast Toll the Dead. Or I am going to do it because maybe I'll get rid of that one. And maybe that's a bigger deal. So it provides a more interesting choice than, okay, now everybody on the battlefield is just susceptible to the most powerful version of this. Because everybody's injured after round 2, right? Everybody's at fewer than full hit points. I think that the monsters ran a lot better in 4E. I think that they had more interesting abilities, especially as 4E developed and the designers really got a handle on how monsters should function. There were other elements of the game that made it so that might not be as obvious, but I really love the technology of these are minions, these are regular monsters, these are elite monsters. The elite monsters function as if they were 2 monsters.
Mm-hmm.
And then these are solo monsters, and solo monsters function as if they're 5 monsters, right? With the understanding that if this solo monster is the only target on the battlefield, it actually gets another bump because it's the only target of fire, right? So it has to have ways to escape status effects. It has conditions. It has to have ways to move around a little bit better. It has to have all these off-turn actions and stuff like that. It was just more interesting. But at the same time, the monsters were contained for running in combat. Now, that's not necessarily a virtue, but from the standpoint of a game where combat is emphasized and the DM needs the most streamlined form, like what is this monster really going to do? Right? That was good. I think that you can have your cake and eat it too with that stuff, and write monster entries for where you have a stat block for combat and you have an expanded stat block for role playing and stuff like that if you wanted to. So
yeah,
I don't think there's a limitation.
No, and I think that would make really great D&D. I mean, having just opening that door to not necessarily have to fight. The fact that you could turn your, that monster in brackets into something else at any time, just because. I think that would be absolutely great.
Imagine a 5e lich. This is its combat stat block. This combat stat block does not have the lich's whole spell book in the spell section, like all the spells that this monster prepared.
Yeah.
It has the best tactical choices assumed in that generic stat block. And then another section tells you this is how you modify it. This is actually what this lich is capable of. This is the lich's whole spell book. These are the utility spells that the lich knows, stuff like that. And then if you want to play with that aspect of it, you can.
Yeah.
Now, I'm saying something that's never really happened in D&D.
It has not?
Not really. I mean, the earlier versions of the stat blocks were more that way because they were very simple stat blocks and the descriptive text would tell you more about them, like in second edition and first edition, and what they were capable of, and allow you that space to modify it even on the fly to react to what the players are doing. But I don't think there's ever been a conscious design of this is a generic stat block for combat with good tactical choices for this monster in general.
Mm-hmm.
And then the rest of this information is how you modify it, or the actual full suite of how this monster reacts to things, how this monster. So if you want to play with, it's not just combat, then you can. So I don't think it's ever been presented that way. I think it would be really good if it were.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe even great.
Yeah, I think that would be great. Definitely, I think that would be really, really great. Okay, so let's jump at last into 5e. What makes great 5e D&D?
Well, I think everything that we talked about already could make great 5e D&D. If it were added to D&D in some way, I think that there's an opportunity to do that too.
Yeah, but what makes it great now? I mean, what do you look at in D&D 5e and think, this is great?
I think the way that it plays very simply is great. I think that harkens back to the older versions where it was, if you didn't worry about some of the really esoteric rules, like how initiative worked in first edition, and you just played like, I think that it really streamlined the game back down to, I think the new design of 5e was successful in streamlining the game into something that's relatively easy to play and easy to understand how to play. And I think that that's one of the things that makes it great.
Okay, I will definitely go with that because I have found getting to grips with 5e extremely easy. Now, I don't know if I have a bias because I've been playing, D&D since the very early 90s, and I've played every pretty much and read and played the single edition. So because I can see the progression in the rules and how it's gone from one edition to the next and what they've been added and they've been taken away, that makes it a lot easier for me to get to grips with it, because the core is very similar. But I found 5e a lot easier to get to grips with than third edition, or 3.5, a lot easier, and way easier than 4e. And 4e was very streamlined. The combat was very streamlined. So yeah, I think that is one thing that makes it really great. But I'm going to be a little bit controversial here.
You?
Yeah, because and probably even you're not going to expect that answer, especially because of recent events. But I think one of the things that makes 5e D&D great is the way that Wizards of the Coast has gone about it.
Okay, I think I'm going to agree with this, but let's say more.
Okay, I'll say more. You can have an absolutely amazing game. If you don't treat it properly, that game will never be great. If you don't support it with the right people, if you don't support it with the right product at the right time, if you don't look at it in the right way, it's never going to be as great as it could. You may have a very good rough diamond, but it's not going to be great. I think the way that Wizards of the Coast has gone about promoting the game, the frequency of the releases, how cautious they have been at the time of creating new material, despite all the fuck-ups, which there have been many. Okay, this is not to wash away all the mistakes that have happened, because there's no way to do that. But despite all that, I think one of the things that makes D&D 5e great is that they have turned it into a very desirable and reachable product, even if it is not cheap. But as a product, they've made it great.
Yeah, I agree with that. I have a little bit more bias because I know an awful lot of people who work on the game. So I happen to know that their hearts are in the right place, even if they screw up, that their hearts are in the right place. So they do care. They do love D&D, and they do want it to be great. And all of them that are there that I know have always wanted that. More than like a marketable product or anything like that. I mean, of course you need a marketable product, but they cared about making a good game, and they still care about making a good game, and they care about being responsive to the community. They do. It may not seem like that from the outside sometimes, but I'm going to tell you that they do.
And I believe that. I mean, I don't know as many people as you do, of course, but I think I know enough people to actually know that is to echo what you are just saying. So I think that is one thing that makes D&D great. It hasn't always been the case, because let's face it, TSR didn't look after D&D the way they should have, and it was still great. But I think what made great AD&D was something completely different. What's making D5e D&D great. So that's a completely different kettle of fish. And as far as I'm concerned, something else that makes D&D great, and how, I don't know how to articulate this, because I need to be very, very, very specific with this one. And is the good part of the community of D&D is fantastic.
Yep.
The good part. Because the not so good part is, flamethrowers with a fire. But I reckon, and I don't know what this was like in the past, because we didn't have a means to reach that much of a community even for 4E, we didn't have as many social networks. We didn't have as much internet connection. We didn't have as many internet tools, and definitely not for 3E. So I don't know what it was like, but the good part of the community, I dig it.
Yeah, I do too. And I think that even in the past there was that sort of thing, but it was more limited because the means of communication, as you said, was more limited. Like Wizards had forums and stuff like that. I mean, most people today would go, "What are forums?" But uh, uh, but there was fun, active, intellectual, or not, or just fun, loving discussions going on, and it was good. And there was that sort of thing going on, different types of social networks that existed back then too, but it just wasn't as widespread. I mean, one of the things I think that has made D&D great and into basically a cultural phenomenon again. So, originally it was a cultural phenomenon, and it's become one again, but it's because of the way it can be shared, unlike any other time in history, in its own history. So, for example, we wouldn't be making this video in 2008, probably. And things like these actual play programs and stuff like that, these shows that people pay big bucks for tickets for, that are actual play shows and stuff like that. I mean, there are movie stars playing D&D and talking about playing D&D, right?
Openly.
So, openly. There's a big name Hollywood D&D club. I mean,
I think there are a number of them, which is absolutely brilliant. Yeah. I saw the other day. I was in Twitter, and I saw David Floor had tweeted a screen grab because a bunch of rock people, rock stars, had released a photograph, a selfie. There were like 5 of heavy metal's greatest. And David Floor said in the photograph, great D&D group you have in there. And D. Snyder replied to him, said, "If only you knew." I just thought,
I totally believe D. Snyder plays D&D.
That would be the coolest thing ever. I mean, thinking of the Twister Sisters finishing a concert and going to play D&D, boom, that would be unbelievable. Okay, so
well, the thing is that this is meaningful, and I just want to I would just want to nail this down, because there was a period where, for whatever reason, I'm not trying to accuse anybody of anything or anything like that, or disparage anything, but for whatever reason, you could mention to, and I know this used to drive more than one of my colleagues a little. They would be like, "What? Like, but it didn't used to matter, right? You could tell somebody, "Oh, well, the guy who runs Adventure Time plays D&D, and he is interested in doing things about D&D with us." And like, "Who's that? Does anybody know who he is?" It's like, or the guys from My Chemical Romance play D&D. They openly play D&D. We should be doing something about that. Well, now Dungeons and Dragons, Wizards of the Coast as a corporation is doing things about that, and that is great.
Yes,
it has made D&D into the cultural phenomenon that it is now, and it is one again. It was back in the early 80s and the late 70s and early 80s, and it is again.
And
it's because of that.
Yeah, and I'm going to add something, because I can imagine an awful lot of people watching or listening to this and saying, "Well, they do that because it's it's a corporation and they just want to make money and so on and so forth." So you know what? Stop. The cynical me see you. Trust me, I see you. I know what you're saying and why. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they do it because they want to make money. It doesn't matter if they do it because they just want to reach a wider audience to sell more. But it doesn't matter. As far as I'm concerned, the point that matters about all those celebrities coming out is that they are taking away the stigma from anybody who plays D&D. There
Which
is,
used to be a thing. It used to be a thing.
it still
It isn't.
is.
I don't think it is among people that aren't in our generation, though.
You'd be surprised. At least in my country, we still see. When I tell people, what the hell, a couple of weeks ago, I got the comment of, "Oh, but isn't that for children?"
Yes, and for adults.
So that still happens, and there is still an awful lot of, "Oh, look at the geek, look at the geek." I have been at a London Comic Con, and I saw what the equivalent, I suppose, what a jock would be, stopping in their super shiny, mega chromy car, stopping by the queue and just screaming, "Geeks!" And we were all like, yeah, and they just left. But the stigma is still there, and within certain arenas of geekdom, it is very much there. Even with wargamers with minis and warhammerers and cosplayers. Trust me, that stigma is still very much alive with an awful lot of people. And having all these celebrities out there, all these genuinely exceptional professionals, it helps destigmatize that a lot. So as far as I'm concerned, I don't care if Wizards of the Coast does this because they want to sell more games. I care because the positive impact of those people coming out as D&D players is way more valuable than any money that Wizards can make out of it.
Yeah, I think that the important aspect of this is that it's not fake,
Mhm.
right? They didn't just pay. They did pay Deborah Ann Wall to play D&D for them,
Mhm.
but they didn't pay her, and she had never played D&D before.
She wasn't acting. She
Right.
was playing.
They did pay Joe Manganiello
Mhm.
to play D&D on the stage for them, but he loves D&D,
Oh, so
right?
much.
So it would be different if it was this corporate thing where it was all fake, right? Where they hired a bunch of actors to play D&D, and they play D&D, but then you wouldn't have Slate Magazine writing up an article about Joe Manganiello's D&D club, right?
Mhm.
Like a big one with pictures of his game room and stuff, I mean, which is really cool. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
and his wife buys him D&D paraphernalia for holidays and his birthday. I mean, so
That is amazing.
oh, Joe's gonna love this dragon head for his game room. Like, that's
Okay.
love right there. That's love right there.
Yes, that is definitely knowing your partner very, very well indeed.
Yeah,
Okay.
and accepting them and then
Mm.
supporting them, right? That's
Yeah,
great.
that's the foundation of a great relationship, I think. Okay, so let's for the last few minutes, let's talk a little bit about, because we've set what makes D&D currently and in the past great, but there are an awful lot of people out there who want to make great D&D. So let's start drawing some conclusions, because I mean the crafty people out there will figure out, okay, so this is what I have to do. But let's draw some conclusions as to what do people have to do to make great D&D. For those who want to really make great D&D for DM's Guild, what do they have to do?
So, what I have always done as a professional is, and I don't mind giving this away because if it helps even one person's creativity spark, or it just makes the creativity or the creation of this stuff more enjoyable for somebody, to me that's great. So I never start with the mechanics. If I The best stuff that I've ever made started with the movie in my head. What is this thing like? What does it look like? If this were genre fiction or a genre movie, fantasy movie
Mhm.
or a fantasy novel, What would it look? What would it read like? What would it look like in your imagination? What does it look like on the big screen? What is this thing doing? What does the environment look like, or whatever? And for me, that has always made design work so much easier. I start with, what is this thing doing? If I were standing in front of this thing, what would it look like? What would it do to me? What would, you know, what would its capabilities be? And then I just make the mechanics fit that vision, rather than, some people are probably better at coming up with mechanics and then adding the narrative elements later. But for me, the narrative elements come first, and the mechanics derive from that.
Okay, I like that. I like that a lot because I work in a similar way, but not exactly the same. Because I do have, which is an adventure, by the way, that I have to send you, because I would like you to tell me what you think of it, and how we can convert it to 5e. But I had this, one of my adventures that I just wrote. I had this, not mechanic, but it was a theme of the time travel. I want to know, what if you have two realities, two timelines in exactly the same place, overlapping each other, but you can only see them or go from one to the other if there is certain aspects of, certain conditions that you meet when you approach certain nodes where these time lines are mixing together.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of what sparks the curiosity, and then I can craft the story around it of how that happens, and then I craft this is how the jumping from one timeline to another is going to work. So I guess it's a matter of finding out what works for each person to be able to create great. I mean, at the end of the day, it has to be a great story. Otherwise,
or at least the potential for one, with
yeah,
the pieces. The pieces are there with the potential for several great stories. Hopefully, several great stories can emerge from it.
yeah. So okay, so one, start with the story and build the mechanics around it. That's kind of a way of doing it, which I do like the idea an awful lot. I would,
And I did this for every game company that I worked for.
right.
That's the way I worked. I started with the narrative elements, the pictures in my head, the movie in my mind, and then I would look for the rules that would support it. And if the rules weren't there, I made them up.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, yeah.
Well, since we have defined that and decided that one of the things that make D&D great is that you can actually make up your own rules if you want to, then
Yeah, exactly.
that kind of that works very well indeed. One thing I would say to people that would make great D&D is support the right community. Don't think about who you want to write for. Who do you want to make happy with this? Who do you want to upset with this? Who would you rather is left indifferent? Because at the end of the day, I don't think you can please everyone all the time.
No.
So I think it's easier to just narrow your vision to, these are the people that I want to go for, and these are the people that I want to please. So this is the kind of story that I want to make. I think that is one thing that makes not just D&D, but pretty much any game really great.
I'm going to take a step further and say that's what makes life better. So focusing on what you want to happen, how you want something to be, creating the circumstances and the tools to make that situation possible and then true, without worrying about what you don't want. What you don't want will fade into the background anyway if you aren't building a structure for it to exist in. Build the structure for what you do want to support, how you do want something to grow, what you do want to see. don't fight the thing that is going to die anyway if you don't give it any attention, right? I'm not saying don't. I'm not saying that there are no fights to fight. What I'm saying is that when you're building something,
Mhm.
you build what you want. You don't hedge against what you don't want, right?
Yes, that is a beautiful way to put it. Actually, I think that I like actually that I like a lot. Um, you know something else that I think would make great 5e?
You're going to tell me.
Mm. And this is for all the authors out there. Um, take the risks that Wizards of the Coast can't afford to take with your designs.
Yep.
Okay, what's it is a corporation, and when people say, "Oh, you know, well, D&D 1 already has this that comes in this other game that's been there for years and years," relax. You know, they cannot possibly risk innovating too much, because then they're going to have 4E all over again. You know, they're going to have way too many people complaining way too much about way too many things, because they were way too different from what they were expecting and they were used to. So what they cannot afford, literally they can't afford to be that innovative. But people can. And I think what makes D&D great is the fact that it allows for that to happen. That it allows for you to decide, well, you know what? I am going to devise all of these things that D&D is not great, and I am going to make it great. And run with it. If you think there is anything that can make D&D great, go for it and do it, because you will be able to get the credit of having made D&D great. And I think that's brilliant.
And I'm going to flip that on its head a little bit. One of the things that makes 5e great to me is knowing that from the very beginning, and I know this is true, from the very beginning, the plan was always to make a stable enough system that it could be expanded upon, but it did not have to be rebuilt. You understand what I mean?
I do.
So no, if there's a sixth edition, the way that fifth edition was constructed intentionally was to make sure that if there's other editions, they're going to look a lot like fifth edition. They're just going to take the knowledge that they've gained and improve it the way they think the community wants it to be improved. And that's why they're doing playtests too, because they want to see what works. But the intention from the very beginning with 5e was to build a game that's stable enough that you don't have to create something like third edition or fourth edition again. It's a game that can be iterated on enough, but also backwards compatible. And I think that in many ways, they succeeded, because for me, a lot of there are little things that put the lie to what I'm about to say, but I think the core of the game works.
Oh, no, I agree. I don't think anybody can argue that. I mean, they could, but they would probably be, mistaken. The core of the game works. If you strip it down to the bare minimum, that is solid. That is really solid. And the fact that you can mutate it into so many different things,
right?
That's solid.
So if you have this machine in the center that works, and you can just add pieces that build whatever articulation you want.
Correct.
I'm not trying to suggest that the 5e engine is the be-all and end-all of role-playing games. I think there's plenty of other ways you can play role-playing games that are great. I'm just saying that for what D&D is supposed to do,
correct,
the core of 5e is solid, and it doesn't need to be drastically altered. It doesn't need the type of edition change that occurred in third edition or fourth edition.
No, I agree. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I look at the core of D&D, and I look at Magic the Gathering, and it's very similar. Magic the Gathering has very few rules, but it's just full of exceptions.
Hmm.
That's just the way it goes. And I feel that 5e is very much the same, and that you have a number of core rules that you don't really play or mess up with too much. And then you have enough exceptions, some of which are official in brackets, which is why they are in the books, in the official D&D books. And then there are these other myriad exceptions that you can add to anything you want. And you can take some of the existing ones away, and it doesn't break.
Right, exactly.
So, I agree. I think the core works for what is meant to do.
For what 5e is meant to do. This is a high fantasy adventure game where you're exploring a fantastic environment. You have to fight and stuff like that. It's not Call of Cthulhu or
correct
stuff or what's that one? There are plenty of other games that are more exploration oriented or investigation oriented, and they do what they do well.
Exactly. And I see a lot of the people complaining about, but you can do. It's not what's been designed to do. You can tweak it, you can change it, you can do fantastic things with it, but you have to do it. It's just not. I don't know. It's like going to a Chinese restaurant and complaining that they don't serve Mexican food. But you have the ingredients to do Mexican. Why aren't you giving me? It's not kind of the point.
Yeah, exactly.
All this place. No. So, okay. Well, we've been going for an hour now. I think it's time to start wrapping it up. I hope that people have got something positive out of this. Because I know at some point we just sound like two crop nuts, driveling over how much we love D&D, and well, yeah, guilty.
Guilty. I love plenty of other games too, but I love D&D.
And you know what? When we finish this season, we're gonna talk about other games that we love. We can make absolutely great as well. But this season is 5e.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. For sure.
Yeah. Okay. Viewers, listeners, thank you. Seriously, truly appreciate it. Your thoughts are welcome.
Yep.
Not the shitty ones. Okay, let's be specific about this. We want the cool, constructive, critical thoughts.
Critical's fine.
Yeah. Critical's fine. Just don't be an ass. That's all. That's all we ask.
I mean, if you are an ass, we'll just ignore you. So it's
exactly. I mean, it's just not. Trust me, it's just not going to go anywhere. Trust me. One of these days, I need to publish how many comments I censor in my channel, so people know. Oh, right. So I really don't get anywhere. Because I only leave the ones that are completely hilarious in their ridiculousness. And I'm going to laugh at you for the rest of my life. You stay. But the rest, I'm never going to see you. You're useless. So anyway, Chris, thank you very much.
Thank you, Paco.